So today we have Jeromy Sonne. Jeromy, am I pronouncing your last name right?
You are, yeah.
Okay.
I think you might have actually been the first person to ever get it right out of the gate. So congratulations.
Nice. All right. Well, Jeromy is the CEO of Decibel Ads and has been in the performance marketing space for over 10 years. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies, DTC brands, startups, and everything in between. So he's here to chat with us about the power of audio advertising. So, Jeromy, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so probably the thing that I should do next is pull up the slides that I prepared for this. But yeah, really excited to talk about audio. I think that just kind of before I get into the whole thing, I'm always excited to see marketers tackling new channels, right? I think that it's important to kind of like look at all of the options that are out there. Excited to chat with everybody today. Anecdotally, we've been working with No and with partners with No for a while, and so this is really cool that we're going to be able to get into this in a more intentional way today. So I'm going to go ahead and share the slides that I've got, and you can see my favorite photo. Everybody see the slides all right? We good? Cool.
Yep, they're up. They look great.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Yeah, so you can see my favorite photo. So yeah, like long story short, if you're a DTC brand or, a performance marketing focused brand, you're probably leaving customers and money on the table this Black Friday, right? And the reason I say probably is because you're probably just putting more and more money into Facebook or Meta, like Instagram, right? Or Google, or maybe, one of the other, kind of like social platforms, right? But you haven't expanded kind of outwards. Where we see with Decibel, is really like folks that have hit like a local maximum with Facebook or, have run into problems with Facebook as we know. Facebook's great, by the way. I love Meta. I've spent many millions of dollars on there and worked on it for years and know lots of great people there, but I think we all know that it can be a little frustrating sometimes when it comes to like support and things like that, right? And so we see a lot of advertisers come and look at things like CTV, digital out of home, and audio when either they've hit like a maximum with Facebook and they're kind of just ROAS is going down and down over time. You're not acquiring as many net new customers as you want. You're not getting the brand reach and kind of building into those like new audiences, right? And like really you need more channels to activate and reach net new customers. I think that it's like a really interesting thing that like you have to consider. Like a lot of people aren't necessarily on Instagram every day, aren't necessarily on Facebook every day, right? And the other thing is that customers respond psychologically different to different kinds of mediums, right? And that's seems like kind of simple and obvious on the face, right? But like, you know, some people, when you tell them about something, that's the way that they want to purchase. Or other people, they really want to dive into like a white paper or something like that and like understand like the science behind something or, the mission or, that sort of thing in order to be able to, purchase, right? And so I think that there's just like a lot of interesting things by expanding into new channels generally. But today I'm going to talk about audio because when folks have those conversations about expanding into that next channel, it's typically connected television like a Hulu, it's digital out of home like a digital billboard, right? Or it's audio. So why is audio one of these channels that you should consider? Well, contextually, people kind of listen to audio all the time, right? And whether they're in the car, at the gym, they're working, right? Audio is kind of like a ubiquitous background for their entire lives. And so you can hit people in really different like life context, which lets you kind of like, you know, basically trigger buying decisions at different points during their day when they're worried about work and they're hearing about something that's relevant to their work life, right? Like that might be a more powerful trigger. If they're, thinking about their health actively while they're on the treadmill or lifting weights, right? Like that's another like potential trigger. And so I think that's part of the power of audio. The other thing is that audio is mostly 30-second unskippable spots, right? I think that, what, your average Instagram story view time is like what, 1-2 seconds, right? You have to immediately hook somebody, as they're scrolling through and like snag that attention, right? I think I see a lot of advertisers, and I've talked about it in the past, is like scroll stop rate and things like that. Audio, as it's like kind of a more traditional ad spot, you actually have kind of that undivided attention. And since people's phones are in their pockets and off, or Spotify's on their laptop in the background, right? Like that sort of thing. You end up having you end up being able to tell a more complete story, right? And really kind of like actually set it up and give more of a narrative rather than just going for the fast hit attention grabber. Lastly, the scale. Audio, 2/3 of Americans listen to digital audio every week. If you include radio and things like audio out of home, it reaches 90% of Americans every single week. And that's more than Meta, right? Like you're literally like as a medium across like all the channels, you're actually being able to hit more people than you ever could on like Meta or even like a Google search or anything like that. And so I think that, there is like a chunk of your audience that you've never interacted with if you've only ever spent on Facebook, right? And that's why I think that like audio is also like something really to consider if you're looking for that reach, that net new customer, to expand that top of the funnel. So we work with like a lot of different brands, right? Health and wellness, like local services, even stuff like retail restaurants and stuff like that. And we've seen like a huge growth in interest from folks, especially usually around podcast advertising, but generally audio, that are looking for that next channel, right, as they're hitting scale. So, what does audio specifically mean from an inventory standpoint? So, there's host-read podcasts, right? I think most people are familiar with that. You reach out to a podcast, you pay a host, they, talk about like how great the product is, whatever. I think that most folks listening to this probably are pretty familiar with that. Then you start thinking about radio, right? That's your traditional AM, FM in your car. But what I think a lot of folks like maybe aren't as aware of is like this growing segment of streaming music, right? Like ad-supported Spotify, ad-supported radio, but like that even goes beyond into stuff like live sports and all sorts of things, political talk, like all of that stuff, right? Where that's traditionally an ad-supported channel as well. Podcast, like programmatic podcast in particular is what I mean there. And that's really going to be like a huge part of this growth market. Programmatic podcasts, you're going to see more and more as like, people want to monetize, especially like the platforms, the long tail of all of those podcasts, right? And so it's not just going hit by hit buying a podcast host, it's a programmatically inserted ad at the point of the download that folks are able to get into there. So that could be a pre-roll, a mid-roll, post-roll, all of those sorts of things. In video game audio is like a huge growing segment, right? Like, so, and you're even starting to see chatter about like that expanding into like streaming, right? Like streaming, like not like streaming video games and things like that, where, it's a better user experience to cut away just the sound and maybe put up like a companion banner ad, right, than it is to necessarily cut away to like a video. And so that's why video games are like really exciting, interesting part of the growth market when it comes to audio advertising. And lastly, you have audio out of home. A lot of restaurants and bars and public places like that are starting to include Bluetooth speakers with music that will play ads. And so, that's an interesting emerging part of the market as well, where you're going to see more and more, if you're trying to hit like a specific geographic area or whatever, or you want to hit people like in the context of being in a restaurant, in the context of being in like a bar or something like that, in the context of being in retail, that's like a really interesting growing market that's very relevant for some advertisers. So Jamie gave me a very kind intro, but like, who am I to talk about all of this, right? I was a performance marketer for 10 years. I kind of stumbled into Facebook ads in 2011. And, ever since then, I have like, I had a string of very successful early projects, and that kind of has a way of hijacking your career, right, into this like performance growth marketing sort of approach. And, it's funny, back in the day, we actually called it growth hacking, but I'm pretty sure that's like kind of a passe term at this point. But yeah, I've worked with Fortune 500 companies. I've worked with a lot of agencies. I worked with a lot of DTC brands, startups, everything in between. I helped take an app to #1 grossing in the iTunes and Play Store, scaled e-commerce brands, all sorts of stuff, right? And so my background isn't like ad tech. My background is really like performance marketing, right? So I deeply understand a lot of the concerns, a lot of the motivations and things like that when it comes to that side of the world, right? So, I think it's important because a lot of ad tech companies are kind of recursive. They're ad tech built for ad tech, built for the same advertisers over and over. And I think that we at Decibel are taking a little bit of a different approach. So why did I start an audio platform? Like, anecdotally, my evolution as a marketer was from 2011 till 2018. I was pretty similar to many marketers where I was mostly running Facebook ads. I was mostly running Google ads, that sort of thing, working either in-house for like director of marketing for a fintech company, or again, like agency side, or, as a consultant for agencies, freelancers, all sorts of different contexts, right? And in 2018, I kind of saw the writing on the wall with machine learning. And I was really like a media buyer, analytics focused person by trade. And it became clear that like the creative was the most important part of that doing all the like old, for those of you that have been in the game for a long time, doing a lot of those like kind of micro super segmented targets and things like that was like really swimming upstream against the way that Facebook and other platforms were building with these machine learning models. And so, wanting to double down into that kind of media buying focus, and that I'm really not creative in the way that a lot of amazing marketers are, with like UGC style videos and things like that. I said, okay, I'm going to get into like the wider programmatic universe. There's a lot of like, there's a lot of ad spend there. There's a lot of like opportunity. And so I started doing that, right? And so started consulting mostly for agencies, doing things like connected TV buys, doing things like digital out of home buys, doing things like audio buys. Had a string of, really great hits regarding audio, helped take a book to #2 on Black Friday on Amazon. Obama's biography beat us out last year. So, you can't can't complain too much about #2 at that point, right? But that was really the tipping point for me where I'm like, okay, I've seen audio work pretty consistently as part of like these like larger campaigns. And I think that it's following this evolution where you're seeing more and more brands like start to use things like connected television, like Hulu ads and Roku ads and things like that. Audio is clearly following the same path, but there just needs to be like a lot of tooling. But audio as a market, is a 57.9% growth rate year over year in 2021. That makes it the single fastest growing channel right now. But it's the single fastest, but it's still relatively small, right? So there's a lot of blue ocean there. Facebook, you can compare it to, if you're thinking about ad load and remembering that audio actually reaches more people than Facebook. It only had 4.9 billion in digital audio spend as of 2021. If you lump in radio ads as well in the US, that starts to look more like 18 billion. But you compare that to just Facebook, which had 117 billion, right? And now you're looking at like a pretty significant like delta of like amount of attention and time people are spending on a platform versus the ad load that's actually in there, right? And so to me, that signals that like there's a lot of opportunity for growth for the folks that like figure it out early and strike early. So it's kind of one of those like, if you were early to Facebook, 2014, 15, even, you could capture a lot of value. And I think the audio is like largely in the same place and will be for at least the next few years. Decibel. So what is Decibel? What are we building? We're an ad buying platform. We aggregate together nearly all the digital audio ad platforms to give marketers the tools they need, right? Audio is a relatively immature market. It requires a lot of the tooling that advertisers have come to expect with something like a Facebook or like a Google, right? I keep saying Facebook. I should probably switch to Meta at some point, but old habits die hard. But we've built like a lot of this kind of tooling to help make it easier, right? So like the first thing was people are like, how do I make an audio ad? So we included human and AI voices to help make the ads. You just provide the script. How do I target it properly? I don't want to just like target everybody listening to like rap music, right? Or something like that. Or, I don't want to target just like a specific show or something. So we included all like the advanced audiences that people are used to be able to like target exactly who they're trying to reach. We have conversion pixels. We have an easy to use campaign creation flow that doesn't require a minimum to get set up. So you don't have to go sign like an enterprise contract with somebody like Trade Desk, right? And then advanced analytics to optimize and measure your results so that you can understand the value that you're capturing. So getting away from Decibel and not trying to be too self-promotional, right? But just kind of setting up like, where I've come from, my experience, and then what we're doing. What is the difference about like kind of audio in general, right? Versus like Facebook or like a Google? Because a lot of marketers are really used to, let's say, like a click-based channel, right? And that presents some challenges and a little bit of a mindset shift when it comes to audio. But when you're able to kind of contextualize that, that's when you can like really be successful. So it's primarily a non-click channel. The frequency matters a lot. Frequency on other platforms can be a negative signal, but with audio, it's actually a very positive signal. And we see campaigns that achieve higher frequencies get better outcomes. There's a focus on storytelling and like repeating calls to action inside of the actual ad creative itself. It's highly segmented and local targeting, right? So you want to go back towards those kind of like micro targets that is how a lot of marketers used to do things with digital advertising before kind of, the machine learning models like really took over and you go broad and let Facebook figure it out. And the way you measure outcomes can be a little bit different, right? You want to rely on platforms. I'm a little biased, but like no, right? In order to help kind of close the loop and make sure that you have a holistic understanding of your results. So let's dive into like each one of these a little bit more deeply. So primarily non-click channel. Measurement needs to be done more holistically. Pixels are good. Our pixel is great. But there is like challenges there, right? On a listen through versus a click through, right? And so I think marketers are generally more comfortable with click throughs. And, later on, spoiler alert, we actually do have a solution to help basically bridge that gap. But things like post-purchase surveys like no are of critical importance, right? As are things like lift and holdout tests where you test in one specific geography with audio, keeping everything else the same, right? Versus, again, just going broad and person to person, nationwide or worldwide. And so that can help you understand your results a little bit better. Optimization has to be based on the way you measure. If you can't measure it, you can't optimize it. And so, broad and let it rip is kind of death. But you pick those different geographies, you run different tests in each, you measure, you iterate. It's a more intentional process. But it can be more rewarding in a sense that you're able to capture more of that halo effect. And the typical user flow is the user hears the ad X number of times, then they Google it, they go directly to the site, they call a phone number or they text from an in-ad call to action, right? Or, they click like a companion banner ad, which again, something Decibel has been very focused on to help bridge that gap a little bit, but I'll talk more about that later. Frequency matters. Again, I kind of hinted at this, but frequency is a very, very positive signal, we have hundreds of advertisers on Decibel. And the thing I've consistently seen is the advertisers that get a frequency over 5 start to get exponentially better results, right? And that repetition is a huge deal. I think that a lot of radio advertisers even will say go up to like 20 plus like frequency, right? And so frequency is something to optimize for rather than against. So having a smaller audience that you're hitting more often is way more advantageous, and frequency is a thing that you want. You need to focus on storytelling and repeating the calls to action inside of the ad itself, right? And so brands that do well with audio generally, kind of zooming out, is ones that have like a purpose, right? Ones that have like a benefit. And so they focus less on just like how it looks and, kind of like the fast action, fast cut shots, and more of a, kind of benefits focus to your life, and more of like having a conversation about like, your brand's mission and things like that. I think that's what really helps stand out. And I know that there's a lot of like cause focused brands, mission focused brands, as well as brands that, maybe like looking at something, you wouldn't obviously see the benefit. Like the easy example for that is like a supplement, right? I look at like a little pill and I have no idea if that's going to make my life better or not, right? But when you have the chance to actually explain that, you can get a deeper connection with your audience and actually have like, a greater, like, you can resonate with them better. So that said too, repeating the calls to action, we see like a really positive correlation with people that repeat their calls to action at least 3 times in the actual ad, right? And that helps people remember what action to take, because you are largely relying on them to, remember to Google it later, things like that, because they might be at the gym, they might be in the car, that sort of thing. And so, the typical like user path will be something like they hear the ad, then later they Google it, or they go directly to the website, right? Or in some portion of them will like text and do the calls to action. And then, as I've been alluding to, Decibel has like a solution where we help remind folks and drive up that frequency with a mix of audio and display. Highly segmented and local targeting reigns supreme. Again, driving up that frequency, making it easier to measure. All these things kind of mesh together. Pick a specific audience at a specific location, right? That also lets you test it for quite a bit less money, right? You don't need to spend, a lot of the traditional like publishers and things like that in audio. If you talk to them directly, they'll be like, oh, you need to spend at least, $25,000, $50,000 in order to like see any kind of outcomes. And that's just never sat right with me. And so it's really about right sizing the audience and saying like, look, smaller audience, more frequency. That's going to give you the signal that you need in order to be able to, confidently say that, yeah, this is going to give us an outcome. This is like a channel that's viable for us. Our messaging, our targeting, whatever is what we want to be doing, and then expand out later. And so, pro tip, like with that, right? If you're going to try and run across a bunch of audiences, make templates. And so we see this a lot where folks will make a template and they'll swap out, like the location or like the call to action or like some, some other piece of it in order to localize that, make it specific to those users, which also has a positive correlation with outcomes. I think that that's a great way of like cutting down on creative overhead. So, kind of for the second part of that, I know not every single person sells direct to consumer. I've seen like a lot of like DTC brands, especially say like, as they hit scale, they're starting to get into retail more and more. It's kind of more of a holistic mix of direct sales as well as driving retail traffic. And so, a thing that we see that's really popular is if you're doing a pilot with a retail partner or something like that, a lot of people will grab the zip code that store is in and make the call to action to go to the store, right? And so that can get better outcomes for those sort of tests with retailers, drive those sort of sales to, create confidence with a retail partner to increase the purchase orders that they're doing, right? And, get larger, expand to more and more stores. And so that's like another popular one. And I just wanted to call that out in particular because, while the focus, of course, is direct acquisition, there are a lot of other use cases for audio, and that's where stuff like audio out of home and things like that come in. So measurement is different. It's often not last click. I'm not going to repeat myself too many times on that, but we're working on changing that. So measurement is a little bit more holistic. The best is post-purchase surveys like now, right? I've been a big believer of that, not even just for audio, but just generally. Customers telling you what was the most important, like what was the trigger that actually got them to purchase, even if they had like multi-touches across the way, is to me kind of like the North Star. And it's what I used to use. I'm biased by my experience, of course, so take this for what it's worth. But to me, that's always been the most important piece, right? Is what are our customers saying to us? The second best is like pixel measurement. Did the user listen to the ad and then come to the site? And did they then purchase? Is very, very useful, something built into our platform. And I really do try and encourage. And then the third best is sales lift measurement by geography, right? Again, going back to this idea of targeting just a very specific area and looking for lift. And so the way that kind of the fast explanation of how you actually go about doing that is by saying, this is what we expect the sales would be, like projecting forward, adjusting for seasonality and some other factors, And then, did we see results above that? How much? What percentage? What does that actually translate into revenue wise? How much did we spend on the audio ads? And that's how you actually are able to calculate like a ROAS. And I think that like at the end of the day, what we want is, not just impressions. I think that a lot of these channels, while they're really powerful, they've done a bad job about, tying it to actual business outcomes. And, coming from a performance marketing background, I've always viewed that as like, basically the most important thing that you can do. So what sort of outcomes do advertisers generally see with audio? So our experience, right, of course, some percentage of advertisers, they don't see the results they want, right? And that's true of Facebook, that's true of anything. But of the campaigns that perform, right, we typically see like a 2 to 3x return on ad spend, right? Keeping in mind that audio is pretty top of funnel. A lot of the tools I think that we've built kind of pushes it more towards like a middle of funnel sort of like decision making, but it's still top and middle, right? And so you're trying to acquire net new people, maybe people that haven't heard of you before. Maybe they have seen you on an Instagram or Facebook or something like that, but they're still in that decision making process. So those sort of campaigns see the 2 to 3x ROAS, and our best historical campaign that we've ever seen got a 20.4x return on ad spend. That was a direct to consumer health brand, right? Like health and wellness. And so health and wellness, again, because of like audio lends itself to being able to explain the benefits, right, of a product that isn't necessarily obvious from, super obvious from like the perspective of like seeing a picture on Instagram or something like that. That's why I think those sorts of brands tend to do really well. I'll also share that one of the, I mentioned it earlier, Slice, we have a case study about this, got a 6.4x return on ad spend when driving to like a retail location, right? And so, those are great campaigns. And I think that that's something to keep in mind when you're setting like performance benchmarks if you want to start testing audio. So the quick start cheat sheet, right? Like this is like of the people that come in and want to do a test, this is what I see works best. They pick 3 cities. They use a 30-second ad spot. We have 15s and 60s, and 60s are great. 15s can be good depending on what you want, but 30 seconds is like kind of the standard. That's what like Spotify uses. And, that's going to get you the maximum amount of like reach across platforms. You run the ad for at least 2 to 3 weeks to correlate with that frequency, right? And give you a good window of like measurement. And then you have several measurement options in place, like a no, the pixel, and you're maybe doing like a geographic lift test or something like that. And audio tends to be, again, more top and middle of funnel. So craft your creative and messaging accordingly. So how to get started with Decibel, you can sign up and be live in 5 minutes if you have creative ready to go. There's no minimums. We have the tools in place to do all of the above. The thing that I've been alluding to that I haven't been saying is Decibel has a really unique approach in that we have a type of campaign where it's the audio ad and then the listen of the audio ad is actually retargeted with display. And we see much better outcomes with those, and it gets you a last click attribution in a lot of circumstances, right? And so, if you want to check it out, use the code we know for $250 in credits when you spend $500, $750 for a campaign. If you're tight enough with your targeting is absolutely viable to start. If you pick like a handful of zip codes or, pick like a smaller kind of Midwestern city, you can definitely see some sort of outcome from that kind of a spend, right? Not a lot, but you can. And then the super pro tip, yeah, that's what I was saying. The conversion campaign, which retargets the ad listen, that'll be coming live here on October 31st. And that's it. That's kind of my like fast and dirty version of audio. Again, like I just want to emphasize that it's, a really emerging channel. I think that the people that are bold and figure out these channels early capture a lot of alpha. And then, from like an agency standpoint, right? Now is the time to kind of establish yourself as the expert and be kind of that Facebook expert that was around in 2014, 2015, right? And was able to ride that up and gain a lot of clients, gain a lot of market share, and gain a lot of, influence, being like one of the few experts in the area. And so if you're going to try it, I would say give it a shot. And, if you can make it work over one or a couple of tests, right? I think that you can be in a really great position to succeed as an agency owner or as a brand owner or marketer. So that's what I got. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Jeromy. So we did have a question come in Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and ask you,
Please.
and then you can give your answer. And if anybody else has questions, be sure to send them in. So this person said, I'm seeing a lot of options for audio channels here that seem like they would be really great for my brand. If I am a smaller brand and don't have the capacity to spend a ton of time building out all of those audio channels, is there a specific one or two you recommend them
Mhm.
focusing on? And what is your reasoning?
Yeah, for sure. So typically what I'm actually encouraging is to narrow based on the geography and like the targeting. Again, thinking like a person level targeting, right? But then also geographic so that you can drive up that frequency and then go run of network, right? Maybe taking off audio out of home, but like doing the rest. And the reason that you want to do that is that our system by default tries to get you the lowest possible CPM. And so you're going to reach that user wherever they're listening, right? And you're going to do it for the cheapest way possible to get the most kind of bang for your buck as you test this out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Jeromy. And be sure to check out Decibel Ads, everybody. And as always, if anybody needs anything from No, let us know. No, no, no. And you can always reach out at hello@nocommerce.com. So thanks, everybody. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much, Jeromy.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a nice
Bye.
day.